Millionaire saves 6-year-old twins abandoned in trash by their stepfather. They became his miracle. The story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and after the video, tell us how this story made you feel. Your thoughts matter to us. Enjoy the story. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling. Windows of Mitchell Enterprises' 50th floor boardroom. Alexander Mitchell stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his steel-gray eyes scanning the faces of his executive team. "Gentlemen, I believe this concludes our business," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him a legend on Wall Street. "The Davis acquisition moves forward tomorrow." As the executives filed out, murmuring congratulations, Richard Westbrook lingered. Once Alexander's closest friend and now his chief competitor, Richard's smile never quite reached his eyes. "Impressive as always, Alex," Richard said, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "But I wonder, is another company really what you need? That mansion of yours must echo with emptiness." Alexander's jaw tightened. "My personal life isn't your concern, Richard?" "Of course not," Richard replied smoothly. "Just the observation of an old friend." After Richard left, Alexander gathered his documents with controlled precision, though his hands wanted to tremble with rage. Richard always knew exactly where to strike. "James will be waiting with the car, sir," his assistant reminded him. 30 minutes later, Alexander's limited edition Aston Martin purred along the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. He had dismissed his driver, preferring to navigate the city himself tonight. The freedom of the open road had always calmed him after difficult meetings. His phone chimed with another message from his estate manager about renovations. More decisions about a house that felt increasingly like a museum rather than a home. Alexander switched off his phone in frustration. As he crossed into a neglected neighborhood on a detour to avoid construction, the Aston Martin's engine sputtered and died. "Perfect," Alexander muttered, guiding the car to the curb. He called James, who promised to arrive within 20 minutes. Through the rain-streaked windshield, Alexander watched a rusted pickup truck swerve down the street. The vehicle lurched to a stop 50 yards ahead. The driver, clearly intoxicated, stumbled out, yanking open the passenger door. Alexander squinted through the rain. Was that children? The man roughly pulled two small figures from the truck. Twin girls, perhaps 6 years old, wearing matching pink jackets now soaked by the downpour. Their faces were masks of terror as the man dragged them toward a large dumpster. "What the hell?" Alexander whispered, disbelieving. The man hoisted the first child up, ignoring her screams, and deposited her into the dumpster. As he reached for the second child, something inside Alexander snapped. Without thinking, he was out of his car, rain pelting his $1,000 suit as he sprinted toward the scene. "Stop," he shouted. The man turned, revealing bloodshot eyes and a face contorted with rage. "Mind your own business, rich boy," he slurred, shoving the second child into the dumpster. Alexander lunged forward, but the man was already scrambling back into his truck. The pickup peeled away, leaving Alexander alone in the rain beside the dumpster. Small whimpers emerged from inside. Alexander peered over the edge to find two identical faces staring back at him, tears cutting clean tracks down their dirt-smudged cheeks. "It's okay," he said softly, reaching down. "I'm going to help you." The girls cowered against the dumpster wall. Alexander's heart thundered in his chest. What was he doing? He should call the police, child services, someone qualified to handle abandoned children. Then one of the girls spoke, her voice barely audible. "Please don't leave us." Alexander Mitchell, the man known for calculated billion-dollar decisions, made the most impulsive choice of his life. "I won't," he promised. "You're safe now." Alexander gently lifted the first child from the dumpster, her small body trembling against his chest. The second girl reached up with hesitant arms, her eyes wide with distrust that broke something inside him. "I've got you," he murmured, setting down the first child to reach for her sister. Standing in the rain, Alexander studied the twins. Identical, tear-streaked faces, tangled blonde hair and matching pink jackets filthy from their ordeal. They clung to each other, watching him warily. My name is Alexander, he said, kneeling to meet their eyes despite the puddles soaking his Italian leather shoes. What are your names? The slightly taller girl answered, her voice protective but wavering. I'm Mackenzie. This is Madison. Mackenzie and Madison, Alexander repeated. That's a lot of courage in such small packages. A sleek black Bentley pulled alongside the curb. James emerged, umbrella ready, then froze at the sight before him. Sir? Confusion creased his weathered face. James, we need to get these children somewhere warm. Now. The driver hesitated. Sir, shouldn't we call the authorities? Child services would… Not yet. Alexander cut him off, surprising himself, with the firmness in his voice. Get the emergency blankets from the trunk. Minutes later, the twins sat huddled in the Bentley's backseat, wrapped in thermal blankets, their small bodies still trembling. From cold or fear, Alexander couldn't tell. Where are we going? Madison whispered, the first word she'd spoken. Alexander met James's questioning eyes in the rearview mirror. Everything in his life had prepared him for calculated risks with measurable outcomes. This was neither calculated nor measurable. Home, Alexander answered, the word feeling strange on his tongue. His estate had never been home, merely an address where he occasionally slept. What about our dad? Mackenzie asked, fear evident in her small voice. Alexander's jaw tightened. That man, he left you. Nobody who does that deserves to be called a father. He said we were too expensive, Madison whispered, looking down at her mud-stained sneakers. Alexander's chest constricted painfully. In the world he inhabited, human beings were never too expensive. Sir, James spoke quietly as they approached the security gate of the Mitchell estate. Have you considered what comes next? Alexander watched the twins, now leaning against each other, exhaustion finally overcoming fear. In their faces, he recognized something he'd spent decades burying: vulnerability, the need for protection. Yes, he said with sudden clarity. Hot meal, warm beds, and safety. Everything else can wait until morning. The iron gate swung open, and for the first time, Alexander felt he might be bringing more than just himself home. The Mitchell estate emerged from the darkness like a castle from a storybook, sprawling stone facade, manicured gardens, and illuminated fountains leading to massive oak doors. As James pulled the Bentley to a stop, Alexander noticed Madison's mouth form a perfect O of wonder. You live here? Mackenzie asked, suspicion tempering her awe. I do, Alexander replied, realizing how the mansion might appear to children who, moments ago, had been discarded like trash. It's too big, really. Most rooms just collect dust. Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper, stood waiting at the entrance, her usual stoic expression faltering at the sight of the twin girls emerging from the car. Mr. Mitchell? She questioned, eyes darting between Alexander and the children. These are Mackenzie and Madison, Alexander said with unexpected firmness. They'll be staying with us. They need baths, clean clothes, and food. Inside, the twins stood close, together on the marble foyer, looking impossibly small beneath the crystal chandelier. Their eyes tracked upward to the vaulted ceilings, then across the formal sitting room with its untouched antique furniture. Where are all your toys? Madison whispered. Alexander blinked. I don't have any. Mackenzie frowned. No, toys at all? Even grown-ups have stuff they like to play with. Mrs. Reynolds coughed discreetly. Perhaps the young ladies would like to see where they'll be sleeping tonight. Alexander nodded gratefully. Children. What did he know about children? While Mrs. Reynolds prepared a bath, Alexander found himself standing awkwardly in the guest bedroom that would house the twins. The immaculate white linens and ornate Victorian furnishings seemed woefully inappropriate now. Mr. Mitchell, his housekeeper said softly, appearing at his elbow. I've taken the liberty of sending James for some necessities, children's toothbrushes, pajamas. Thank you, he murmured, relieved by her foresight. Later, scrubbed clean and drowning in makeshift nightshirts fashioned from Alexander's smallest t-shirts, the twins sat at the kitchen island. Mrs. Reynolds had prepared grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Comfort food, she called it, though Alexander couldn't remember ever eating such things in this house. "Is this place a hotel?" Mackenzie asked between bites. "No, just my home," Alexander replied, watching in fascination as Madison carefully dunked her sandwich into her soup. "But there's nobody else here," she persisted. "Don't you have a family?" The question struck with unexpected force. "No," he admitted. "It's just me." Madison looked up, soup dripping from her sandwich. "That's sad." Such simple words, yet they penetrated deeper than any boardroom critique ever had. "Will you send us away tomorrow?" Mackenzie asked, her protective instinct visible as she moved closer to her sister. Alexander studied the twins, their identical faces showing different emotions. Mackenzie's guarded concern, Madison's open vulnerability. For the first time in decades, his answer wasn't calculated. "Not tomorrow," he said softly. "Not until we figure things out." As the girls finally drifted to sleep in the massive guest bed, Alexander stood in the doorway, watching their small forms nearly lost among the pillows. His mansion had never felt so simultaneously empty and full. Morning sunlight streamed through windows that had never witnessed children's laughter before. Alexander found himself tiptoeing past the guest room, unwilling to disturb the twins' sleep. In his home office, he made calls that would have been unthinkable 24 hours earlier. "I need your most discreet investigator," he told his head of security. Two children, twin girls named Mackenzie and Madison Thompson, approximately 6 years old. "Find everything: birth certificates, medical records, family history. And I need information on the man who abandoned them." Alexander hung up just as Mrs. Reynolds appeared at the door. "The children are awake, sir. They're asking if last night was a dream." In the kitchen, the twins sat side by side at the island counter, legs swinging beneath them. Madison's face brightened when Alexander entered, while Mackenzie's remained cautiously neutral. "Good morning," he said, suddenly aware he had no idea how to talk to children over breakfast. "Did you sleep well?" "Your bed is bouncy," Madison offered. "We tested it." Alexander found himself smiling. "I'm glad it meets, with your approval." Mackenzie studied him with eyes too perceptive for her age. "What happens to us now?" Before Alexander could answer, his phone vibrated. The investigator had already found preliminary information. "I need to make things safe for you," he said, carefully. "That means learning more about your situation." "You mean about our dad leaving us in the garbage?" Mackenzie stated flatly. Alexander winced at her directness. "Yes, and about who might be looking for you." "Nobody's looking," Madison said quietly. "Dad said nobody wanted us anymore." The words landed like physical blows. Alexander excused himself to take the call in his office. "The girls' full names are Mackenzie Grace and Madison Hope Thompson," the investigator reported. "Mother deceased 3 years ago, cancer. Father is Clayton Thompson, 42. Multiple arrests for public intoxication and petty theft. Currently unemployed. No other living. Relatives have been located. The authorities? No missing persons report filed. Child Protective Services has a file on the family. 3 previous wellness checks based on neighbor complaints." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "And legally?" "Thompson has full custody, but given the abandonment and his record, emergency. Custody could be granted to a concerned citizen, while the courts decide permanent placement. Foster care is the likely outcome." The word foster sent a chill through Alexander. As an orphan himself, he knew the system all too well. When he returned to the kitchen, the girls were helping Mrs. Reynolds measure pancake ingredients. Madison had flour on her nose. Mackenzie was carefully counting blueberries. "We're making breakfast," Madison announced proudly. Alexander watched them, these resilient children who had been discarded like unwanted possessions less than 12 hours ago. Their father hadn't even bothered to report them missing. "I need to ask you both something important," he said, sitting at their level. "Would you like to stay here for a while? Not just today, but for some time?" Mackenzie's eyes narrowed. "Why would you want us?" It was the million-dollar question, one Alexander couldn't fully answer himself. Instead, he offered the only truth he was certain of. Because no one should ever make you feel unwanted again. By the end of the first week, Alexander Mitchell's meticulously ordered world had been thoroughly upended. His mansion, once a monument to minimalist luxury, now bore evidence of children at every turn. "Sir, the interior designer is online, too." His assistant's voice crackled through the speakerphone. "She's quite insistent about the modifications you've requested." Alexander glanced at the crude drawings spread across his desk. The twins' vision for their bedroom, complete with a ceiling that looked suspiciously like a starry sky and walls that were apparently meant to be sunshine yellow. "Tell her it's non-negotiable," he replied, adding, "and order 2 of those princess beds, different colors." He'd quickly learned that identical twins rejected identical everything else. A crash echoed from somewhere in the East Wing, followed by Madison's distinctive giggle. "I should go," Alexander said, ending the call. He found the girls in the formal dining room. Mackenzie stood on a chair, attempting to retrieve a remote-controlled helicopter lodged in the antique chandelier, while Madison directed operations from below. "Mrs. Reynolds said we couldn't play with the fancy glass things," Mackenzie explained, seeing his expression. "So we were being careful and flying it super high instead." Alexander bit back a smile. "A sound strategy in theory." Madison looked up with pleading eyes. "Are you mad? Daddy always got really mad when we broke things." Alexander's chest tightened, at the fear in her voice. "It's just a helicopter. And frankly, that chandelier has always been rather ostentatious." He lifted Mackenzie from the chair and positioned it himself. "However, if we're going to conduct rescue operations, we should at least use proper safety protocols." That evening, Alexander sat through his first ever animated movie, answering an endless stream of questions. Why doesn't the snowman melt? Do you think mermaids are real? Can we get a dragon? Later, attempting bedtime, Alexander discovered the complex ritual of children's sleep preparation. The right stuffed animals arranged just so. Water that wasn't too watery. Nightlights positioned precisely. And the unexpected request for a story. "I don't really know any children's stories," he admitted. "Make one up," Mackenzie suggested, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "Feeling foolish," Alexander began. "Once there was a man who lived alone in a big house." "That's you?" Madison interrupted sleepily. "Yes," Alexander continued, surprising himself with where the story led. He was very rich but very lonely, until one day he met 2 brave princesses who taught him what really matters. Looking down, he realized both girls had fallen asleep, their small hands somehow having found his during the story. Alexander stepped out of his town car in front of Mitchell Enterprises, adjusting his tie, now adorned with a small strawberry stain from Madison's breakfast mishap. The past 2 weeks had transformed his schedule into a delicate balancing act between corporate empire and impromptu tea parties. "Mr. Mitchell," his assistant hurried toward him, tablet in hand. "The board is already assembled and—" She paused, gently removing a princess sticker from his suit lapel. "Sir, is that glitter in your hair?" Alexander cleared his throat. "Arts and crafts are more hazardous than mergers, Patricia. Make a note." The boardroom fell silent as he entered. Richard Westbrook sat among the directors, his presence unexpected and unwelcome. "Alex," Richard's smile was practiced. "Perfect. I hope you don't mind my joining. Given the rumors about your sudden interest in childcare, the board thought I might offer assistance during this distraction." Alexander felt the room's energy shift. "My personal life doesn't affect my business acumen, Richard." Of course not, Richard replied smoothly, though taking in random children does raise questions about your judgment. 2 little girls plucked from a dumpster. It reads like a tabloid headline. The room temperature seemed to drop. How do you know where I found them? Richard's smile didn't waver. News travels, especially unusual news. After the meeting, Alexander's security chief pulled him aside. Sir, someone's been asking questions about the girls. A private investigator, not ours. That night, Alexander found himself standing in the doorway of the twins' newly decorated bedroom, watching them sleep amid their constellation of nightlights. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer. Social services received anonymous. Tip about improper guardian relationship. Preliminary inquiry tomorrow. Alexander's blood ran cold. Richard was moving faster than anticipated. The next morning, as he explained to the girls that a social worker would be visiting, Madison's eyes welled with tears. Are they taking us away? No, Alexander said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at him. They just need to make sure you're happy here. Mackenzie, ever protective, crossed her arms. But what if they don't believe us? Alexander knelt to their level. Then we'll fight. Together. Later, browsing his tablet, he found an article on a financial news site. Mitchell's mystery children. Savior or opportunist? The photo showed Alexander ushering the twins into his car, their faces partially visible despite his attempts to shield them. The byline listed a journalist known to be in Richard's pocket. The subtle dismantling of his reputation had begun, a game Richard played expertly, but this time the stakes weren't just Alexander's pride or profits. As he closed the article, his phone chimed with a calendar alert. Mackenzie and Madison, ballet class registration. Alexander Mitchell, who had navigated financial crises and corporate takeovers without flinching, felt genuine fear. For the first time in his life, he had something truly precious to lose. The social worker's visit had been grueling. 3 hours of questions, observations, and barely concealed suspicion. Alexander found himself mentally exhausted, retreating to his study while the twins watched their afternoon cartoon. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages about Richard's latest moves, including a carefully planted story questioning whether Alexander's sudden guardianship was a publicity stunt to humanize his corporate shark image. Seeking distraction, Alexander opened the antique desk drawer he rarely accessed. Inside lay a small wooden box, weathered and simple compared to his otherwise luxurious possessions. He turned the key in its tarnished lock. The contents remained as he remembered: a faded baseball card, a small blue marble, a tattered photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a child's drawing labeled "My Family" in uneven letters, stick figures standing beside a house with an impossibly large sun overhead. What's that? Alexander startled. Madison stood in the doorway, curious eyes fixed on the open box. Just some old things, he answered, about to close it when Mackenzie appeared behind her sister. Is that you? She asked, pointing to the photograph. Alexander hesitated. No, that's my mother. The twins approached cautiously, sensing the shift in atmosphere. You never talk about your parents, Mackenzie observed. Alexander ran his finger along the photograph's edge. There's not much to tell. My mother died when I was 5. My father left soon after. Understanding dawned in their identical expressions. You were alone too, Madison whispered. Foster homes mostly, Alexander admitted. 7 different ones before I turned 18. Mackenzie's analytical gaze assessed him with new insight. Is that why you didn't call the police when you found us? Because you didn't want us in foster care? The directness of her question caught him off guard. Partly, yes. Madison reached for the child's drawing. Did you make this? Alexander nodded. In school, I drew the family I wished I had. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications before Madison climbed onto the chair beside him. Our mom used to say that families aren't always the people who make you, she said, her voice small but certain. Sometimes they're the people who choose you. Mackenzie joined them, examining the marble. We had a mom who loved us, Then we didn't. You didn't have anybody. That's worse. Alexander felt something crack inside his carefully constructed walls. I had nobody, he corrected gently. But now perhaps we all have somebody. Madison leaned against his arm, her small body warm and trusting. After a moment, Mackenzie did the same from his other side. Outside the study window, a car with tinted windows lingered at the estate's gate. Richard's surveillance, no doubt. But inside, for the first time since childhood, Alexander felt he might understand what home truly meant. It has to be exactly 3 marshmallows, Madison explained, gravely, watching Alexander prepare the hot chocolate. Not 2, not 4. And a cinnamon stick, Mackenzie added, perched on a kitchen stool. Mom always said it's not proper hot chocolate without cinnamon. Alexander nodded, taking these instructions with the same seriousness he applied to billion-dollar negotiations. Saturday morning hot chocolate had become a ritual over the past 3 weeks, a small tradition born from the twins' casual mention that their mother used to make it for special occasions. Should I add whipped cream? He asked, holding up the can. Only on extra special Saturdays, Madison replied. Alexander tilted his head. And what makes a Saturday extra special? The twins exchanged glances. When something good happens, Mackenzie said, or when someone needs cheering up. Alexander considered this as he stirred the simmering chocolate. His phone had been buzzing all morning with alerts about Richard's latest maneuver, a concerned citizen interview suggesting Alexander might be grooming the girls for some nefarious purpose. The court date for temporary guardianship was approaching, and Richard seemed determined to poison public opinion beforehand. I think, Alexander said carefully, this might be a whipped cream kind of Saturday. They carried their mugs to the sunroom where autumn sunlight spilled across the floor. Alexander had rearranged this once formal space with comfortable cushions and the twins' growing collection of books. Can we ask you something important? Mackenzie began, her expression serious. Alexander nodded, bracing himself. Their questions had grown increasingly perceptive. Do we have to go back to school soon? The question wasn't what he'd expected. You don't like the tutor? She's okay, Madison shrugged. But she doesn't let us do science experiments like our old teacher. Alexander smiled. I thought you might want to stay home a bit longer, until things settle. Because of the man who's saying mean things about you? Mackenzie asked. Alexander nearly choked on his chocolate. You know about that? We heard Mrs. Reynolds talking, Madison admitted. She said someone's trying to take us away because they want to hurt you. Alexander set down his mug. Richard, the man saying those things, he's angry with me about business matters. He's using you to get to me. Mackenzie's eyes narrowed. That's stupid. You're just helping us because our dad was awful. We like it here, Madison added quietly. We don't want to leave. Alexander felt something warm spread through his chest that had nothing to do with hot chocolate. Then we'll make sure you don't have to, he promised, adding whipped cream to their mugs. This is definitely an extra special Saturday now. Later, watching the twins read together, Alexander realized that somewhere between emergency rescue and Saturday chocolates, these children had become his priority. Not just charges to protect, but little people he couldn't imagine his life without. The headline glared from Alexander's tablet. Mitchell's child scandal. Witnesses come forward. Richard had escalated from innuendo to outright fabrication, with supposed sources claiming Alexander had a history of inappropriate behavior around children. Sir? James appeared at the study door, his expression grave. There are reporters at the gate. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Keep the security team on high alert. No one gets past the perimeter. And the children? Tell Mrs. Reynolds to keep them away from windows facing the street. Too late. Mackenzie appeared in the doorway, her expression unnervingly adult. There are people with cameras outside. Madison's scared. Alexander knelt to her level. Those people can't come in. You're safe here. They're saying bad things about you on TV, she said quietly. Because of us. Before Alexander could respond, his phone rang, his lawyer. Mitchell, it's bad. Child Services has received multiple complaints. They're sending someone today, not just a social worker, but a removal team. Richard's judge friend expedited an emergency hearing. Alexander's blood ran cold. They can't just take them. They can temporarily, pending investigation. I'm fighting it, but... The doorbell rang, its chime cutting through the mansion like a warning bell. They're here, Mackenzie whispered, eyes wide with fear. Alexander made the fastest decision of his life. Tell them I'm not home. Buy us 2 hours, he told his lawyer before hanging up. He turned to Mackenzie. Get your sister and coats, quickly. Minutes later, they slipped through the service entrance where James waited with a nondescript sedan, not the usual luxury vehicle. Easily spotted by media. Where are we going? Madison asked, clutching her stuffed unicorn as Alexander buckled her seatbelt. Somewhere safe, he promised. They drove to Alexander's rarely used lake house, a modest property compared to his mansion, purchased years ago for its privacy rather than opulence. Inside, the twins explored the rustic space while Alexander made frantic calls. His legal team had temporarily blocked the removal order, but a hearing was set for Monday, just 2 days away. As evening fell, Alexander found the girls on the dock, watching the sunset reflect on the water. Are they going to take us away? Madison asked. Alexander sat between them. Some people are trying, but I won't let them. Why do they want to? Mackenzie demanded. Because Richard wants my company. He thinks if he hurts me personally, I'll give up professionally. That's not fair, Madison cried. Alexander looked at these 2 children who had endured so much already. No, it's not. But I promise you both. His voice caught unexpectedly. I will fight for you with everything I have. Mackenzie studied him with those 2 perceptive eyes. Nobody's ever fought for us before. As darkness settled over the lake, Alexander, Mitchell, who had built his reputation on knowing when to cut losses, knew with absolute certainty there was no cost too high to keep these children safe. Dawn found Alexander on the lake house porch, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in hushed tones with his legal team. The hearing loomed less than 36 hours away, and Richard's fabricated evidence seemed to multiply by the hour. Get me everything on Judge Harmon, Alexander instructed. Focus on his connection to Richard. There has to be something there. Inside, the twins sat at the breakfast table, their whispered conversation stopping abruptly when Alexander entered. We have an idea, Madison announced, unusually serious. We could run away, Mackenzie continued, so you don't get in trouble because of us. Alexander's heart clenched. Is that what you're worried about? Me getting in trouble? They nodded in synchronized concern. Listen to me, Alexander said, sitting between them. Adults who care about children don't let them go. Not ever. Throughout the day, as his lawyers built their defense, Alexander found moments to simply be present with the girls, skipping stones across the lake, building a small campfire, pointing out fish beneath the dock. These simple activities seemed to calm the twins whose nightmares had returned since the reporters appeared. After dinner, Alexander disappeared briefly into the boathouse, returning with an armful of supplies. What's all that? Mackenzie asked. A project, Alexander replied mysteriously, for after dark. When night fell, he led them to the dock with blankets and hot chocolate. Above them, the rural sky revealed a tapestry of stars impossible to see in the city. I used to come here alone, Alexander admitted, just to look up at this view. It's like the ceiling we wanted, Madison whispered, awestruck. Alexander smiled, unfolding his secret project, a large piece of paper with 3 outlined handprints. What's that for? Mackenzie asked. When I was about your age, Alexander explained. I lived with a foster family, the only good one. The parents had this tradition where everyone in the family put their handprints on paper together, then made a wish on the brightest star. The twins watched curiously as Alexander placed his hand on one outline. "I wish," he said clearly, "for the privilege of watching you both grow up, safe and happy." Madison immediately placed her smaller hand on an outline. "I wish for us to stay together forever." Mackenzie hesitated, then added her hand. "I wish for that mean man to leave us alone." Alexander carefully folded the paper, then produced 3 small lanterns. "These are wish lanterns," he explained. "In some cultures, they carry wishes to the heavens." Together, they lit the lanterns and released them, watching as they drifted upward, joining the stars. "No matter what happens Monday," Alexander promised, "we are a family now. Some things not even courts can change." For the first time since he'd found them, both girls initiated a hug simultaneously, their small arms wrapping around him with complete trust. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters, their cameras flashing like lightning as Alexander guided the twins through the chaos. Madison clung to his hand, while Mackenzie walked with determined steps, her small shoulders squared against the shouted questions. "Mr. Mitchell, are you using these children for publicity? Did you really find them in a dumpster? Are you aware of the allegations against you?" Inside the courtroom's polished wood and stern atmosphere seemed to swallow all sound. The twins sat between Alexander and Charlotte Winters, the child psychologist who had been working with them. Across the aisle, Richard Westbrook smirked alongside the child services team he had so carefully manipulated. Judge Harmon entered, his expression giving nothing away. As the proceedings began, Alexander listened to the character assassination with growing dread. Fabricated witnesses claiming inappropriate behavior, suggestions of financial motives for taking in the girls, implications that the entire rescue had been staged. When Richard took the stand as a concerned colleague, Alexander felt Madison's hand tighten around his. "I've known Alexander Mitchell for 15 years, Richard testified smoothly. "He's always been calculating. Every move serves a purpose. These children appeared just as the Davis merger was failing, a merger that would have finally given him controlling interest in my company." Alexander's lawyer approached for cross-examination. "Mr. Westbrook, would you describe your relationship with Alexander Mitchell as friendly?" "Professional," Richard replied carefully. "We've had our differences." "Differences," the lawyer repeated. "Like when Mitchell Enterprises outbid you for the Singapore project last year? Or perhaps when Mr. Mitchell refused to support your hostile takeover of Meridian Technologies?" Richard's smile faltered. "Business disagreements are common." "Indeed. And would hiring a private investigator to follow Mr. Mitchell be considered a business disagreement?" The courtroom stirred as Alexander's lawyer produced documents showing payments from Richard's personal account to Black Shadow Investigations, dated beginning the very night Alexander had found the twins. Would bribing a child services employee to falsify reports also fall under business disagreements? Alexander's lawyer continued, presenting more evidence. Judge Harmon's expression darkened. "Counselor, these are serious allegations." "With serious evidence, Your Honor," the lawyer replied, revealing a thumb drive, "including recorded conversations between Mr. Westbrook and Judge Carlton, who originally expedited this case before recusing himself, discussing how removing the children would break Mitchell so he'd finally sell." Richard's face drained of color. "Those recordings are inadmissible." "In criminal court, perhaps," Judge Harmon interrupted. "But this is a dependency hearing where the welfare of children is paramount. I will review everything." As the evidence mounted, Alexander felt a small tug on his sleeve. Mackenzie pointed toward the back of the courtroom where a disheveled man had slipped in, Clayton Thompson, the twins' biological father. "Dad," Madison whispered, shrinking against Alexander. Judge Harmon noticed the disturbance. "Identify yourself, sir." Thompson stumbled forward. "I'm their father. That man stole my kids. After you abandoned them in a dumpster, Alexander's lawyer interjected. I was coming back, Thompson slurred. Just needed some time. Mr. Thompson, Judge Harmon said coldly, are you intoxicated in my courtroom? Before he could answer, Mackenzie stood up. He left us in the garbage, she said clearly, her voice carrying throughout the silent room. Mr. Mitchell saved us. Madison stood beside her sister. Alex reads us stories and makes hot chocolate right. Dad just yelled and forgot to feed us. Judge Harmon's expression softened as he looked at the twins. Thank you for your bravery, young ladies. Would you like to continue staying with Mr. Mitchell? Yes, they answered in unison. 2 hours later, the ruling came down. Temporary custody granted to Alexander Mitchell, with permanent adoption proceedings to follow. Richard Westbrook was referred for criminal investigation, and Clayton Thompson was ordered into mandatory treatment before any visitation could be considered. Outside, as rain began to fall, Alexander knelt before the twins. It's over. You're staying with me. Madison threw her arms around his neck. Forever? Forever, Alexander promised, feeling Mackenzie's arms join the embrace. We're going home. 3 weeks after the courthouse victory, Alexander sat in his study, staring at the formal adoption application. 53 pages that would legally transform him from temporary guardian to father. His pen hovered over the signature line as doubts crept in. What did he know about being a father? His own had abandoned him. His entire adult life had been devoted to business, not family. The twins deserved someone who knew how to be a parent, someone better prepared than a workaholic billionaire who had stumbled into their lives by chance. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Reynolds stood in the doorway, arms folded. The girls are asking when you'll come read their bedtime story, sir. They're quite insistent about finding out what happens to that dragon who couldn't fly. Alexander glanced at his watch. 8:30 p.m. He'd promised to read at 8. I lost track of time, he admitted. Mrs. Reynolds approached his desk, noticing the adoption paperwork. Having second thoughts, Mr. Mitchell? Not about wanting them, Alexander clarified. About deserving them. His housekeeper's expression softened. May I speak frankly, sir? Alexander nodded. I've worked for you for 12 years. In that time, I've never seen you miss a meeting, forget a business associate's name, or fail to prepare for a negotiation. She gestured toward the hall. Yet in the past 2 months, I've watched you learn to braid hair, memorize which vegetables each girl dislikes, and sing, rather terribly, during thunderstorms, because Madison fears the lightning. Alexander smiled despite himself. Those children have changed you, she continued, and you've given them something they desperately needed: stability, safety, and genuine care. I'd say that's rather the definition of a good parent. After she left, Alexander returned to the paperwork, his resolve strengthening. Then he heard whispers outside his study door. You ask him, Madison's voice. No, you, Mackenzie replied. Together. Then. 1, 2. The door pushed open, revealing 2 small figures in matching butterfly pajamas. You promised to read Chapter 7, Mackenzie said. The dragon was just about to try flying again, Madison added earnestly. Alexander set aside the paperwork. You're right, I'm sorry I'm late. As he rose to follow them, Mackenzie spotted the adoption forms. What are those papers? Alexander hesitated, then decided on honesty. They're special documents that would make me your legal father. Not just your guardian, but your dad. Forever. The twins exchanged one of their silent communications. Would we have to change our names? Madison asked. Only if you wanted to, Alexander answered. Mackenzie stepped closer, her analytical gaze scanning the forms. Do you want to be our dad? For real? Alexander knelt to their level. More than anything I've ever wanted in my life, but only if you want me to be. Madison's eyes filled with tears. I already call you Dad in my head sometimes. Me too, Mackenzie admitted quietly. but I wasn't sure if you wanted that. Alexander felt his own eyes grow damp. I would be honored to be your dad. Madison threw her arms around his neck. Then you better sign those papers. After Chapter 7, Mackenzie insisted, trying to maintain her practical demeanor despite her smile. That night, after reading 3 chapters instead of 1, Alexander returned to his study and signed every page of the adoption application. The empire builder, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation, found his hand trembling as he wrote the most important signature of his life. The Mitchell estate buzzed with activity as workers moved methodically through the once austere mansion. Alexander stood in what had been his formal dining room, a space that had hosted political figures and business tycoons but never children's laughter, watching as it transformed into a bright art studio. The girls need somewhere to create, he explained to his bewildered interior designer. Madison's paintings and Mackenzie's science projects require proper space. The designer nodded, though her expression suggested she was still processing the radical shift from the minimalist aesthetic that had defined the Mitchell brand for decades. Upstairs, the twins' temporary bedrooms had evolved into personalized havens. Madison's walls now featured a hand-painted mural of a fantasy forest, while Mackenzie's ceiling had been transformed into an accurate map of the night sky, complete with constellations that glowed in the dark. Mr. Mitchell, his assistant called, from the doorway, tablet in hand. The board is requesting your presence for the quarterly review. They've rescheduled twice already. Alexander glanced at his watch. The twins would be home from their new school in 30 minutes. Tell them, I'll join virtually, from here, sir, the Singapore investor specifically asked. Patricia, Alexander interrupted gently. I promised the girls I'd be here when they got home. We're celebrating their first full week at Westridge Academy. His assistant's expression softened. Of course, sir, I'll arrange the video conference. Later, as Alexander conducted the board meeting from his home office, the mansion's front door burst open with the unmistakable energy of children returning from school. Dad! Madison's voice carried up the stairs. We brought our art projects home. Alexander held up a finger to the camera. Gentlemen, we'll need to expedite the remaining agenda items. I have a prior commitment. The board members, still adjusting to this new version of Alexander Mitchell, nodded with varying degrees of understanding. Downstairs, he found the twins in the kitchen with Mrs. Reynolds, their school uniforms slightly rumpled after a day of learning. Look. Madison thrust a clay sculpture toward him. It's us, all 3 of us. Alexander examined the somewhat lopsided figures, one tall, 2 small, standing hand in hand. Despite its childish execution, something about its simple authenticity made his throat tighten. It's perfect, he said honestly. Mackenzie, less effusive but equally proud, carefully removed a folder from her backpack. I got selected for the science symposium. My project on water filtration was the best in class. That's wonderful, Alexander said, genuinely impressed. We should celebrate both your achievements. Can we have pizza in the new movie room? Madison asked hopefully. The new movie room, formerly Alexander's rarely used library, now featured comfortable seating, a state-of-the-art projection system, and walls lined with children's books alongside business texts. That evening, as Alexander sat between the twins eating pizza, something that would have been unthinkable in his pre-children life, his phone buzzed with a message from his lead counsel. Adoption hearing scheduled for June 15th. All preliminary evaluations. Extremely positive. Alexander felt Madison's head rest against his arm as she dozed off during the animated film. On his other side, Mackenzie remained awake but had snuggled closer than her usually independent nature typically allowed. The Mitchell mansion, once featuring an architectural digest for its sophisticated bachelor aesthetic, would never make that list again. In its place stood something infinitely more valuable. A home, transformed by love and the simple needs of childhood. Golden morning light spilled across the breakfast table where Alexander reviewed summer camp brochures while the twins debated the merits of science camp versus performing arts. We could alternate weeks, Madison suggested, mouth half full of cereal, or attend different camps. Mackenzie countered practically. We don't have to do everything together. Alexander smiled at this development. The girls had been gradually establishing their individual identities, a healthy progression according to Charlotte, their psychologist. Whatever you decide, Alexander said, we'll make it work. The adoption hearing was just 2 weeks away. Home studies had been completed, character references submitted, and even the judge seemed supportive. After months of uncertainty, they were on the cusp of becoming legally what they already were emotionally, a family. The doorbell rang, unusual for a Saturday morning. Mrs. Reynolds appeared moments later, her expression tense. Mr. Mitchell, there's someone at the door. He's insisting on seeing the girls. Alexander's pulse quickened. Who is it? Before she could answer, Clayton Thompson pushed past her into the dining room, looking considerably more sober than at the courthouse, but no less dangerous. There's my girls, he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his bloodshot eyes. The twins froze. Madison's spoon clattered to the table while Mackenzie instinctively moved closer to her sister. Mr. Thompson, Alexander said evenly, standing to place himself between the twins and their biological father. This is inappropriate. Any visitation needs to be arranged through proper channels. I completed the program, Clayton said, waving a certificate. 30 days sober? Court says I get visitation rights. Alexander kept his voice calm despite the anger building inside him. That's for the judge to decide at the adoption hearing. Please leave before I call security. Clayton's face darkened. You think you can just buy my kids? They're mine by blood. Madison whimpered softly. Alexander felt a familiar protective surge, but before he could respond, Mackenzie stood up. You left us in the garbage, she said, her voice small but steady. Dad rescued us. Clayton's eyes narrowed at the word dad. I'm your father, not this rich guy playing house. No, Madison joined her sister, finding courage. A real dad doesn't forget to feed us or leave us alone all night. A real dad reads stories and comes to school plays and makes us feel safe. Alexander placed his hands gently on the girl's shoulders. Mr. Thompson, I understand you've made progress, and that's commendable. But right now, you're frightening the children. If you truly care about their well-being, you'll respect the legal process. Something flickered across Clayton's face, perhaps recognition of the bond evident between Alexander and the twins. I just want, he began, then faltered. What do you want, Mr. Thompson? Alexander asked quietly. Really? Clayton's shoulders sagged. Money. That's why I came. Figured you'd pay to make me go away. The honesty, however deplorable, provided an opening. The girls deserve stability, Alexander said. They've been through enough trauma. If you genuinely want what's best for them, we can discuss a legal agreement. Supervised visitation eventually, perhaps, if they're comfortable. Financial support for your continued recovery, but only if you commit to putting their needs first. Clayton looked at the twins, who stared back with a mixture of fear and something else, pity perhaps. They look happy, he conceded reluctantly. Never looked that way with me. We are happy, Mackenzie said firmly. After Clayton left, having agreed to meet with Alexander's lawyers the following week, Alexander gathered the twins close. Are you both okay? Madison nodded against his shoulder. You didn't let him take... No one will ever take you, Alexander promised. Not ever. That night, after tucking them in, Alexander found Mackenzie waiting in the hall outside her room. What if he tries to stop the adoption? She asked, her usual composure fragile. Alexander knelt to her level. Then we'll fight. But I think he saw today what I've known all along. That families are made by love, not just blood. And nobody loves you two more than I do. Mackenzie's small arms wrapped around his neck. We love you too, Dad. For real. The courthouse looked different today. Warmer somehow. Its imposing marble columns softened by morning sunlight. Alexander straightened Madison's headband for the third time, his normally steady hands betraying his nerves. "You're fussing again." "Dad?" she giggled, batting his hands away. "Everything needs to be perfect," he murmured. Mackenzie, practical as always, checked her small wristwatch. "The judge will see us in exactly 12 minutes. We should go inside now." Alexander nodded, taking a deep breath. After months of preparation, home studies, background checks, and legal maneuvering, this was finally happening. Adoption Day. James opened the car door with a rare smile. "The photographers are set up inside, sir, and the surprise is ready." The twins exchanged curious glances. "What surprise?" they asked in unison. "You'll see," Alexander promised, offering each girl a hand as they walked up the courthouse steps. Inside, they found not just the expected court officials but a gathering of people who had become part of their journey. Mrs. Reynolds dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, Charlotte, their psychologist, beaming proudly, teachers from Westridge Academy, even Alexander's entire executive team, who had learned to schedule board meetings around ballet recitals. At the back of the courtroom stood Clayton Thompson, sober and uncomfortable in a borrowed suit but present as he had promised. Their agreement had been finalized the previous week. Clayton would maintain supervised visitation rights while continuing his recovery program, supported by a trust Alexander had established specifically for that purpose. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Harmon entered, his usual stern expression giving way to a smile at the sight of the twins in their matching blue dresses. "Today is a happy occasion," the judge began. "We're here to formalize what appears to already be a family in every way that matters." The proceedings moved with surprising speed. Documents signed, questions answered, promises made. Then came the moment Alexander had rehearsed in his mind countless times. "Mr. Mitchell, do you understand that in adopting Mackenzie Grace and Madison Hope, you are creating a permanent family relationship that will connect you legally as parent and children for life?" Alexander's voice remained steady despite the emotion building in his chest. "I do, Your Honor. There is nothing I want more." "Girls," the judge addressed the twins directly, "do you understand what adoption means?" Madison nodded enthusiastically. "It means Alex will be our dad forever, not just because he wants to be, but because the law says so too." "It means we're a real family," Mackenzie added, "with papers to prove it." Judge Harmon smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the State of New York, I hereby decree that these children shall from this day forward be known as Mackenzie Grace Mitchell and Madison Hope Mitchell, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereof." He banged his gavel once, the sound echoing through the courtroom. "Congratulations, Mitchell family." Alexander knelt to embrace the twins, no longer concerned about the tears flowing freely down his face. In that moment, the three became one, a Awash family bound not by circumstance or blood, but by choice and love. "We have something for you," Madison whispered, reaching into her small purse. Mackenzie nodded, suddenly shy. "We made it ourselves." They presented him with a simple frame containing their handprints in paint, just like the wishes they had made that night at the lake house, but permanent now. Beneath the colorful prints were carefully written words. "Family isn't about who you came from. It's about who you belong to." "It's perfect," Alexander whispered, voice thick with emotion. Outside the courthouse, as photographers captured the moment for posterity, Clayton approached cautiously. "They look happy," he acknowledged, clear-eyed, in his sobriety. "Happier than they ever were with me." Alexander nodded. "You'll always be part of their story, but thank you for allowing me to be part of their future." Clayton extended his hand. "Take care of my—" He paused, correcting himself. "Take care of the girls." "With everything I have," Alexander promised. Later that evening, the Mitchell estate hosted a celebration unlike any in its history. The formal gardens, once manicured for appearance rather than function, had been transformed into a children's wonderland with twinkling lights, a small carousel, and a chocolate fountain that Mrs. Reynolds had initially protested but ultimately supervised with military precision. As twilight descended, Alexander found himself on the terrace watching the twins dance with their school friends. Madison's spontaneous twirls contrasted with Mackenzie's more calculated movements, different yet perfectly harmonious, much like their personalities. "Quite the change from the man I met a year ago," Charlotte observed, joining him with 2 champagne flutes. "The Alexander Mitchell I first evaluated was all sharp edges and business talk." Alexander smiled. That man wouldn't recognize himself now, and he'd be better for it. As the party wound down, Alexander carried 2 sleeping girls to their bedrooms. Tomorrow they would embark on their first official family vacation, the Mitchell family summer getaway that the twins had helped plan with meticulous detail and boundless enthusiasm. In Madison's room, tucking the blanket around her shoulders, Alexander whispered, "Sweet dreams, Madison Mitchell." The name, their name, felt right in a way nothing in his life ever had before. Down the hall, placing a gentle kiss on Mackenzie's forehead, he had a sudden vivid memory. The cold, rainy night, the dumpster, 2 terrified faces looking up at him. The moment his life had irreversibly, wonderfully changed. "Thank you," he whispered to both girls, though they couldn't hear him. In his study, Alexander opened the wooden box that had once contained his few childhood treasures. Now it held new memories: the twins' first school photos, Madison's ballet ribbon, Mackenzie's science fair medal, and the handprint wishes from the lake house. Family. Not something found, but something built, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. Alexander Mitchell, once defined by what he owned, had finally found what he truly needed: